Dr. Pino in his office and me in the home office. Today we're going to be discussing a topic that has, it's an age-old topic. It is said many times that war is started by the older folks who can't fight them, and those who suffer the most are the ones who do fight them. But truly, the people who suffer the most are the children of those societies and groups that are affected for at least a generation, if not more. And today we're going to discuss a little bit about what's going on with children in warfare, in particular with the Ukraine, but also because you're right, Dr. Pino, we were chatting before the show. A lot of people forget that is not the only war going on our planet right now, is it?
You're right. I mean, there been wars going on in multiple places in the world. Afghanistan, Syria, the Middle East. Um, there's always places of the world that are in constant war. The Palestinians and the Israelis and so on. So Africa. I mean, there are many places in the world where kids have to deal with this. And right now we're getting all the images from Ukraine, and that is a devastating Armageddon. I mean, it's really uh, slaughtering of people
Mm.
with no purpose. And
Civilians,
well,
civilians.
civilians in general, and and,
Yeah.
and 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 I think that that issue in particular is enough for us to be concerned. That somebody with a big arsenal of nuclear weapons can do whatever they want in the world just because they feel like it. I mean, there's no logical rationale. Now, by now, we're kind of accustomed to things not being rational, right? I mean, for the last few years, if not longer, we've been fed a lot of disinformation, and that has led to a lot of different issues. What concerns me, because I deal with kids and I deal with trauma and I deal with the issues related to the kids afterwards, is that the images are very strong, and they're so strong that people get shocked by them, especially when you see pregnant women dying, children dying, you know, cadavers of children being pulled out of the rubble and things like that. Um, that eventually we become numbed to that,
Mm.
and we forget that those people who are not dead are experiencing something, right? There's a whole biological, physical, emotional experience that these people are living, and the consequences for children are pretty staggering. I mean, they're pretty serious, not only in the sense of what is happening to them um, at the moment of the war, at the moment of the bombings, but also what is going to happen to those kids in the context of their development.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, that becomes the most serious issue, right? I mean, these kids really get impacted in a very serious way. In essence, because if you think about children in the context of growth, right? Think about a tree that is growing, and you're feeding the tree, you're watering the tree, you're cutting something so it grows in the right direction, and suddenly it gets a bomb next to it, right? So the ability of the environment to provide the adequate nutrition, the adequate growth experience, the guidance into how to grow, the trajectory of the child gets completely destroyed.
Mm.
And that has pretty serious consequences, right? I mean, the most serious consequence, of course, is that the kid will die, right? I mean, that's tragic in itself. But you also have kids who are going to have pretty serious disability as a result of the injuries they're receiving, right? Um, and then you get into the issue of kids, especially a little older kids, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, right? Who have to find a way to survive.
Mm.
And that makes them tremendously vulnerable to being taken advantage of. I mean, they're
Sorry,
really
I'm still not sure about that.
sorry about that. That's my phone. They're really at the mercy of a lot of things, including the environment, other bombs, adults around them. So the issue of abuse and trauma that is resulting from the fact that they're removed from their environment is pretty real, you
Hmm.
know. I mean, you have to wonder, a lot of these kids are going to be orphans,
Yeah.
and they're going to be in very vulnerable positions and very vulnerable places where bad people can do bad things to them.
Yeah. So you basically develop a small or potential percentage of that generation are going to be forever victims in a way.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have the direct biological injury from either getting hurt by a bomb or a bullet, or but you also get the psychological injuries and you get the social injuries and then you get the social consequences from the aborted development. I mean, you can actually take it up to an abortion of the spiritual development, right?
Hmm.
How can you sit down and talk to a kid about spirituality when they're seeing all this evil around them? It becomes a very difficult issue for them to understand, especially after you have taken away their parents. Yeah.
Years ago, I was speaking to a gentleman who was Filipino and who lived through the Japanese being the occupiers of his country. And it came up when we were chatting about the different things that happened. And he said, yeah, I'll never forget my dad when I was 10 years old, crying his eyes out. I said, why? He goes, because he had me kill my first man. I said, excuse me? So I was 10 years old. A bunch of the rebels had caught some of the Japanese. They gave one to each one of our villages because they had been abusing us. My dad was the elder of the village. Tied him up to a palm tree, handed me a machete with tears in his eyes. Said, "I'm sorry, son. I'm going to have to do this to you." Was very honest about it. He goes, "But we're at
Mhm.
war, and I need every hand that can help me." And he chopped the guy up, and I was just blown away. And spoke to the people who or he raised his sons, and they said, yeah, he has some serious lasting issues about trust, about hatred, um, about even just his response to violence, tons of PTSD. I mean, I couldn't imagine, and some of these kids may actually have to pick up an AK-47 and or watch their parents die or take a life. Incredibly traumatic things.
Well, not only that, but I mean, when you are 7, 8, 9 years old, and you live in Central Africa, and there are multiple wars going on, and some of the purposes of invading a village is to steal the kids and
Mm,
make them soldiers, right? So the issue of child soldiers is a whole big issue in the world, right? In terms of trying to recruit people that would fight and die for you, which is from the developmental perspective, not only from the human perspective, but developmentally for that child. I mean, you're creating a person who can be a very effective killing machine, but somebody that you stole culture, soul, spirit, right? I mean, they become automatic. They just get very good at doing one thing, but you stole their childhood and you stole their development. I mean, the only expectation they have is that they're either going to kill or they're going to get killed. There's
so what
nothing
happened?
in between.
What happens to those kids? I remember back, maybe 15 years ago, that whole issue of African child soldiers was a big thing. They had documentaries about them, and also, some stories of those who got past it. But that seems getting past it was actually rare. What happens to these kids? How does it affect them moving forward in their personal development?
I've had the opportunity to see some of those kids that were taken away from their families to join gangs in Central America,
Mm,
right? I mean, El Salvador, um, Honduras, Guatemala, some of those countries. And what happens, and you actually see it in some of the human trafficking with drugs, right? That they recruit kids very early, remove them from the villages, and then make them carry drugs and things like that. What happens is that the trauma for the kid being removed from their culture, environment, and traditions is so severe that they become disconnected from any emotional issue to the point that they become quite sociopathic, right?
mm,
I mean, it is difficult for them to remove themselves. It becomes a survival skill, right? So they'll do anything for the master from that point on. And since you arrested the development, that becomes a new development, right? So some of these kids grow up to be pretty serious criminals,
Mm,
right? So I mean, you really have to. I mean, I think that you see, right now during the Ukraine war, we talk a lot about how we're imposing sanctions in Russia, right? Because they invaded Ukraine. I think that there needs to be specific sanctions by the world for countries that displace children,
mm,
right? I mean, we really need to have a consensus around the world that this should be a significant part of the Geneva Convention, right? It's not just about how you treat prisoners, blah blah blah. It has to be about how we treat children, right? And because what happens is that everybody's running crazy trying to save their lives. You know, everybody's carrying their kids, and some of those kids will stay with the parents. Some of the kids won't. I mean, even in this Ukraine war, right? The parents are making sure the kids get out of the country. They're going to Poland and Moldova and a lot of Hungary, Turkey, and a lot of other countries. But the reality is that once the parents get to the border, the father has to go back.
wow.
If you are between 18 and 60, there's no excuses for you to stay with your family. You have to go back and fight, right? That's the law in Ukraine. So even in the best of circumstances, the kid is being left with the idea that I don't know if I'm going to see my dad again.
Mm,
It is possible that the last time I talked to my dad when he dropped me at this train station for me to get up to Poland or to another country, maybe that's the last time I'm going to see my dad, right? And that for a child is very traumatic. So, I mean, some people talk about making making wordless damaging to children, right? Um, but you see, when we feel totally powerful and we feel that we own the world and that we can do whatever we want, I mean, this is not new. I mean, I was looking at pictures right now from Aleppo in Syria, from before Aleppo was bombed, and a lot of people would kill with chemical weapons, right?
mhm.
To now, what it looks like. And then you contrast those, and this was the Russian army. And now you look at uh, some of the cities in Ukraine, what they look like before and what they're looking at now, right? So the idea that anybody has enough compassion to have a clean war that says, okay, let's fight it over, you know, army to army. Let's get all the women and children and whoever, the elderly people and the mentally ill. I mean, they just bombed a psychiatric hospital today, for God's sakes,
Oof.
right? I mean, come on. So there's no compassion, there's no empathy. It's just like I'm gonna make you suffer so much that your government is gonna have no choice but surrender,
Mm.
right?
So it's
And
real. It's really is abuse on the most massive scale. Because back, I mean, back in the day, even Revolutionary War here in the United States, and before that, or even to a certain extent in the Civil War, it was one side against the other. Battlefields were drawn. They met on the field of battle, and that was it. There was widespread destruction, of course, in the Civil War, but not like what we see today. And wars previous to that, again, a big battlefield, two armies show up. When the army wins, one army loses, but the civilians were not a directly in the line of combat unless they decided to go there. Wars changed significantly, and as much as we have technology to be specific about what we're hitting, it seems like this war, particularly in Ukraine and some of these other places, is simply to terrorize the population, like you said.
well,
It,
not only that, but you get into a fine line in between fighting a war and getting a country to surrender and ethnic cleansing, right?
uh,
That when you, I mean, and we saw it during the second big war when with the Nazis and the concentration camps.
And more
You,
recently in Bosnia and Rwanda and lots of other places.
but it's not
There's
only that you're killing the kids too,
hmm
right?
that
You're
next
killing.
generation.
That is correct, right? So you have to wonder: is there a calculated risk that is being taken by not only making the population suffer, but by cleaning the possibility of the population growth, right? I mean, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and the way the Geneva Convention sets up the rules is that both sides are fighting have to have a humanitarian component, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's not just one side. uh, I mean, I don't see where the humanitarian assistance to the victims of war is coming from Russia at this point. I don't see where the humanitarian assistance comes to some fractions of the population in Syria, right? So I think it's important that we are realistic on what we're doing, right? Because um, I always say everything we do has to have a purpose. So, but at least be honest enough to let know what your purpose is, right? My purpose is to invade this country and get everybody out of the country, right? I mean, or my purpose is to destroy the morale so I can impose a satellite government there.
Mhm.
Uh, and the problem is that with misinformation and disinformation, basically, as far as the Russian population are concerned, there's no war going on. There's no invasion going on. You know,
It's
they're
a
trying.
repatriation.
Yeah, they're trying to protect the Russian-speaking people from these areas, even though they're killing the Russian-speaking people of those areas. Right. So,
In the past, you said that in Africa in particular, a lot of child soldiers were used, in Central America, the narco gangs. But remember back in the day after the Vietnam War and Pol Pot in Cambodia, who specifically targeted children to be part of the war and for them to decimate their parents, basically to get rid of them, and then they were indoctrinated into this new mindset. There doesn't seem to be that threat here, but it seems that that would be an interesting, even though evil, strategy because kids are at that age so affected by what their parents saying, and they're looking for parental guidance. And when that parental guidance becomes a warlord or a general instead of their parents, that could be very scary, actually.
yeah, and and it's not only in the context of um, utilizing them as soldiers. It's also in the context of utilizing them as sex slaves,
Mm,
which is it's trauma on top of trauma, right? In terms of especially trying to control the children and the girls, and more the adolescent girls in particular, not only as sex slaves, but as being trafficked, right? As a product, which is, I mean, I really believe that there needs to be some rules of engagement when it comes to war that really allows to prosecute those who either kill children, destroy places where children are located, destroy the places where children get their health care, their child care, things of that sort, right? Because um, I mean, these things are being done with the whole world really looking at it and saying why, and nothing really being done, right? People are still living Ukraine. People are still living Syria. I mean, refugees are out of the country already. So there is a huge degree of this, and it's not only about war. I was meeting I was getting together with some friends from Venezuela, right, over the weekend, and we were talking about what's happening in Venezuela in terms of uh, the massive exodus, right, that has happened and the trauma that has been inflicted out of Venezuela because of the scarcity of food and shelter, and the big massive exodus. And I didn't realize that approximately a third of the Venezuelan population has left the country.
Yeah, a lot of capital flight, a lot of personal flight, financial flight. People are just leaving.
Yeah, and when you see that especially people without resources are going to be having to exit their country. It's not really that different than exodus because bombs are falling into your house,
Mm,
but because you have to survive. And the trauma is really not that much different in the long term, right? Unfortunately, one of the major issues that I'm concerned about, because of all the migration that comes from the United States, I mean, I have to deal sometimes with kids that were traumatized, that were raped, whether in a war or in a gang related type of situation, or just as simple as traveling from Central America, South America to to the United States. There's a lot of trauma that happens during that process, and I have to deal with the kids who get suicidal, that get homicidal, are totally hopeless. Some of them very antisocial, and they cannot adapt to the American way. So we have to deal with those consequences. And what has come very clear to me is that we have not developed rehabilitative services. You
mm,
see, you hear a lot about reunification, right? Let's get the kids together with a family. Let's get the kids together with a relative. Let's get the kids together with someone else just because it's a problem we don't have somebody else to give them to.
mm,
But in that process, we're missing a very important point. It is the recognition of trauma, the recognition of the reactiveness emotionally that comes from the trauma associated with parental loss. And then we forget that those kids may have problems in the future, right? So when the kids start having problems, they're trying to become acculturated into the United States. They have been adopted or they're living in foster families. And all of a sudden they're 14, 15, and they're joining a gang and they're doing drugs and they're suicidal and they're violent, right? And everybody asks why.
mm,
Why is this happening now? And I always have to tell people, listen, look at the movie. Stop just looking at the kid in front of you. Look at the movie if you want to understand why you're dealing with this now. And we need to get smarter on recognizing that if we are to be successful at reducing some of the ills of society, we have to look at the movie of everybody we're looking at, of the kids in particular. I mean, kids will tell me, I'm mad, I'm angry, and they have the right to be angry. Okay, they're hurt, they're irritated, they're frustrated. All they've known is that people passes them from one hand to another hand to another hand, and nobody ever stopped to say, "How do I help you? What do you feel? What was it like for you to have gone to this?" And we've talked about this many times before. How do we do that with some compassion and empathy, right?
I think you're obviously you make a very good point about that, but I'm sure there's people out there listening will say, well, once a kid is broken, that's it.
Oh,
Is it
ups.
possible to fix these kids, or is it a permanent situation?
You see, one of the words that I never use when I'm talking to my students or I'm talking to families, for example, is the issue of can we fix this? It's not about fixing. It's about understanding and decreasing intensity, right? I mean, can we remove the trauma from the kids? No. No. But can we provide a helping hand that allows them to understand that there's nothing wrong with them?
Mm,
You see, what happens here is that eventually the kid thinks, especially if you're younger, 6, 7, 8 years old, they keep passing me from hand to hand, right? And I stay here for 6 months and then here for a year and there for 3 years. There must be something wrong with me. A child very seldom would say, there must be something wrong with them. They're the adults. They know everything. They know what's better for me. No, they don't,
mm,
right? because you have to have consistency. You have to have an environment that is conducive to the kid feeling safe so they can express their emotions. These kids are very resilient, right? Which is a good trait, but they won't let you get close to them because they don't trust you. So we have to start very early developing trust that is consistent and lasting, right? Because these kids are not going to trust you, right? So once in a while, they would allow you to look somewhere close if you know how to do it, you know, and to allow them to understand that you're trying to be of help. The problem, Vince, is that eventually they're afraid you're going to leave too,
Hmm.
right?
So they don't want to be invested in it because they think you're going to be gone.
Exactly. So what happens is they end up um, becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I'm going to be the best at doing the worst
Hmm.
because I'm not worth it. Because all these people around me, from the time I was removed from my parents and my culture and my spiritual life, I was removed from that, all I have heard, you know, is that I have to be given to someone. And they really become very callous, if you may, in terms of not allowing you to get close to them. I mean, I have to tell you, I mean, I have kids in the hospital every day that if you push too hard on trying to be empathic, they'll fight you.
Hmm.
They'll hit you, right? And they hit you with passion, with anger, with irritability, with frustration, because they want a hug, but they won't let you give it to them. And
Oh,
and that and
wow.
that kind of explains the dilemma, right? So you have to very slowly, right, approach that if you have enough time therapeutically so they can trust you because they have resorted to very, very basic survival skills. So it's a lot easier to just hit you and push you away when you're trying to get close than to go to the emotional pain of reconciling a loss.
Mm, that's incredible.
Yes.
I mean, how many of these kids make it? I guess is the question, and become productive members of society.
Well, a lot of them do. A lot of them do. There are residential treatments sometimes where we treat kids for months,
Mm,
right? And we try to give them a better chance. The problem is that the continuity of care after that becomes kind of not very good. So, if you can get the kids to get past high school, uh, learning some trade, learning some social skills, they will be able to survive, right? Is it going to be easy? No, it's not going to be easy because the tools are available for them to cope in dysfunctional ways. You know, drugs, alcohol, violence. Gangs are very accepting, right? It becomes a sub society of people who are alike, right? So they do things together. Then that's the closest they will probably get to a social clan, if you may. Uh, So all of those things, including prostitution and human trafficking, right? And I use both because it's kind of wrong to use nowadays the word prostitution. But there are people who fall, and I can tell you of kids that come to my care who say, "I run away because I want to make some money so I can do some drugs." No,
wow.
I don't have a pimp. No, I don't have anybody who's trafficking me. I just feel like doing. Now, they're competent to do that? Probably not, but also we have adults that do the same thing. So prostitution is a thing, right? And it worries me that for as long as we just call it human trafficking, we're not recognizing that there's a lot of people who are not being humanly trafficked, right? That choose to participate in the oldest profession in the world, right? Who need protection.
Hmm.
And if we call it human trafficking and we only treat them as victims, I mean, I've heard of legal cases where people have been accused of trafficking themselves. I
Interesting.
mean, yeah. So the whole issue is a major issue that we need to understand that needs to be dealt with protection and compassion, and not just victimize everybody. Because
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, one other thing I think is important to understand is that we made a mistake very often to perpetuate victimhood with these kids. And I always try to stress to them how important it is the fact that they survive.
Mm.
That they survive because they have skills. They survive because they wanted to survive. It's easy to give up, right? So we have to stress the fact that their survival skills and their ability to survive is something they can build from, right? And that becomes very important.
It's a strength, it's a talent, and it shows that there's value, or they would have given up long ago. Uh,
Exactly.
Once again, Doctor, amazing information. It's a very heart wrenching subject matter. We're watching these things unfold in Ukraine. We have to remember that it's going to have ramifications for generations, and mainly with these kids. So,
Yep.
a little
And
more
think
compassion, understanding goes a long way
that's
for sure.
that's that's a that's a initial approach. Let's understand, let's be compassionate, let's be neutral. Hey, nice talking to you. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a good